What Reverend Moon proposed. The idea that humanity's spiritual DNA could be corrupted and need restoration, that's what Reverend Moon proposed in his controversial 1996 address, completely reframing how we think about salvation and human destiny.
That's such an intriguing way to look at it. How does he explain this spiritual genetics concept?
Well, he presents this fascinating alternative reading of Genesis, where the fall wasn't about literal fruit, it was about premature sexual relationships that disrupted God's original plan for establishing what he calls a true lineage.
So he's essentially arguing that humanity's core problem isn't just abstract sin, but an actual corrupted spiritual bloodline?
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is how he traces this theme through biblical history, finding these patterns of restoration attempts, especially through mother son relationships that most readers probably overlook.
Hmm. Like the story of Tamar, which honestly seems pretty scandalous to most readers. But Moon sees it as this crucial turning point.
Right. He views Tamar's determination to continue the chosen lineage, even through deception, as creating this vital condition for eventual restoration. You know what's particularly interesting? He connects this directly to Mary and Jesus.
Oh wow, so how does he interpret the traditional Christmas story then?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. He presents this whole alternative narrative where Mary's pregnancy was supposed to be protected by Zechariah's family, but that foundation crumbled. He actually quotes Jesus' sharp words to Mary at Cana, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" as evidence of this breakdown. Now,
That's quite a radical reinterpretation of Jesus' mission, suggesting the crucifixion wasn't the original plan.
exactly. And he supports this by pointing to specific biblical passages where Jesus expresses frustration, like when he asks, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Moon sees these as hints that Jesus' family relationships weren't fulfilling their intended providential roles,
Well, that certainly explains why his movement puts such emphasis on marriage and family ceremonies.
right? Because in his view, these blessed marriages are literally changing humanity's spiritual DNA. He sees it as the key to finally resolving what went wrong in Eden. He even draws parallels between the Cain Abel relationship and modern global conflicts.
The level of detail in his theological framework is remarkable. He seems to have an explanation for every biblical narrative.
And what's particularly fascinating is how he connects it all to modern times. Like, he sees the world wars as following this pattern of restoration where the side that strikes first ultimately loses, just like in the Cain and Abel story.
That's quite an ambitious vision, reframing all of human history through this lens of spiritual genetics.
Um, yeah, and you know what really strikes me? The way he builds this entire theological system around the concept of true love, arguing that even God needs an object of love to fulfill his purpose of creation.
Well, that's certainly a different take on divine nature than most traditional theologies.
And it raises these fascinating questions about how religious movements reinterpret sacred texts. Like whether you agree with his conclusions or not, the sophistication of his argument shows how foundational assumptions about Eden can lead to radically different views about humanity's spiritual journey.
So, in the end, he's essentially proposing a complete reimagining of salvation, not just as individual spiritual transformation, but as this cosmic process of restoring humanity's original relationship with God through purified family lines.